Hey, come downstairs right quick. They're about to get it open.
A judge sentenced Sergeant Wayne Jenkins to 25 years in federal prison.
You have a gun in probably, I would say 2 1/4 just by looking at it.
The protectors have become the punished. Once untouchable, corrupt cops now face life sentences, crushed by the very law they swore to uphold. But how did they react when their freedom vanished forever? Don't miss this. What you're about to see will shake your faith in justice to its core.
Blue is charged on 4 counts, including first-degree premeditated murder in the strangulation death of Jenny Webb, the Bridgeport woman bearing his unborn child.
In 2012, Jennifer Webb, a 30-year-old administrative assistant from Michigan, made an exciting discovery. She was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and anticipation, especially when the sonogram test revealed that she was going to have a little boy. Jennifer promptly shared her happiness with her mother, calling her in tears to announce her plans to name her unborn son James or Braxton. Despite the joyous news, Jennifer's pregnancy faced one important challenge. The father of the child was not involved, and she had concerns about whether she had shared the news with his wife. Jennifer believed it was crucial for the baby's birth certificate to include the birth father's name, and she felt the man's wife ought to know beforehand. Wanting to address these concerns, Jennifer planned to meet with the baby's father on the evening of August 30th. That night, Jennifer was annoyed by the impending meeting. However, she ultimately decided to go anyway, a decision that would change her life forever. At around midnight, 2 police officers with the Buena Vista Township Police Department, one of them being Kenneth Blue, stumbled upon a gruesome discovery. As they approached the rural dead-end road, they found Jennifer lying on the ground. Upon closer inspection, the officers noticed a peculiar sight. A long cord was attached to the roof rack of Jennifer's car and extended down the ditch to where her body lay. Even more chilling was the fact that the cord was wrapped tightly around her neck. Recognizing the severity of the situation, the detectives wasted no time launching an investigation. They quickly secured the crime scene and began searching for clues that could shed light on what happened to Jennifer. One of the detectives stumbled upon a note written by Jennifer. The note revealed her thoughts on taking her own life. It stated that she had struggled with the idea of being pregnant for several months and had finally admitted to herself that she was not okay with the situation. When the detectives questioned Jennifer's mother, she dropped a bombshell. The father of Jennifer's baby was Kenneth Blue, one of the police officers who found Jennifer's body. This revelation sparked a chain of events that led the detectives to uncover new details about the case. As the investigation continued, the detectives stumbled upon messages between Jennifer and Kenneth Blue on Jennifer's cell phone. These messages provided further insight into their relationship and revealed their intimate connection. Moreover, when they examined Jennifer's call log, the detectives noticed the last person she had contact with was Kenneth. In order to determine the manner of Jennifer's death, a forensic pathologist was called in. The pathologist's findings contradicted the initial assumption that an extension cord strangled Jennifer. Instead, the pathologist determined that Jennifer may have been placed in a chokehold from behind and died as a result of neck compression.
She died of the suffocation. We call it chokehold.
This new information cast doubt on the initial crime scene analysis, indicating that the death may not have been as straightforward as initially thought. During an interview with Kenneth Blue, the detectives noticed several injuries on the officer's body. There were noticeable injuries to his eye, forearm, and index finger. When the DNA results of the paternity of Jennifer's unborn baby confirmed the father was Officer Kenneth Blue, the detectives wasted no time in arresting him and charging him with Jennifer and her unborn son's murder. In 2012, Kenneth Blue went on trial and was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Additionally, he was given an extra 65 to 100-year sentence for the death of his unborn son. During Jennifer's mother's victim impact statement, she had the opportunity to address Kenneth Blue directly. With a mix of anger and sadness, she said,
"Go to your cage and think about how you squeezed the life and breath out of my daughter and grandson, and I hope it haunts you every day for the rest of your life."
It's unimaginable to think that a father and New York City police officer could ever abuse their young son so badly that it would ultimately result in the child's death. However, that is exactly what happened to Officer Michael Valva.
The slight boy with hazel eyes who loved school was beaten and starved.
Thomas lived as a prisoner, given a death sentence that was executed, while this defendant will have a cell with a bed and a blanket and a pillow and heat.
In 2022, a Long Island, New York jury convicted a former New York City police officer with the second-degree murder of his 8-year-old autistic son, Thomas Valva. During the trial, it was revealed that the principal and teachers of Thomas Elementary School, where Thomas attended 3rd grade, had made over 24 calls to Child Protective Services in the 3 years before the child's death. Testimony during the trial revealed that Thomas's teachers had repeatedly raised concerns about his physical well-being. They testified that on several occasions, Thomas and his brothers arrived at school covered in bruises. The extent of the injuries raised concerns among staff members, who suspected that the children were being abused. Furthermore, several school staff members described instances where they witnessed Thomas eating crumbs off the floor and out of the trash. Additionally, it came to light that Thomas wore pull-ups all day, despite being 8 years old, which was made due to his incontinence, believed to be caused by the stress of not using the bathroom for long periods while at home. According to the prosecution, Michael Valva abused his son for several years before January 17, 2020, when Thomas ultimately went into cardiac arrest and died due to hypothermia. On the night of January 17th, Thomas and his brother, also autistic, were locked in the garage at their Long Island home. The garage lacked proper insulation and was unheated, making it extremely cold. At around 8 a.m., Thomas, confined to the freezing garage, soiled himself. Based on security camera footage and audio records, Michael Valva can be heard telling his fiancée, Angela Polina, to make the 8-year-old boy eat his feces. Michael Valva verbally berated Thomas, cursing him for soiling his pants before school. He ordered Thomas to strip down so he could hose him off in the yard before school with cold water. One of the Valva family's neighbors' security camera footage caught Thomas losing his balance and falling, hitting his head as he walked down an icy path after Michael hosed him off in the yard. Minutes after the fall, at around 8:50 a.m., Michael Valva took his son back to the garage. The recordings revealed alarming statements by Michael to his fiancée. He can be heard stating that Thomas was catatonic and needed help. Michael then proceeded to slap his son repeatedly, yelling, "Wake up! Are you alive?" The security cameras captured these actions. Despite witnessing his son's condition, Michael did not seek immediate medical attention. Instead, he tried to wake Thomas, who was unresponsive. After failing to revive his son through a warm bath, Michael Valva finally made the call at 9:40 a.m. to report Thomas's condition. The ambulance arrived promptly and transported Thomas to the hospital. However, Thomas's condition continued to deteriorate, and upon his arrival, his temperature was only 76.1 degrees. Tragically, less than 1 hour later, Thomas passed away. The medical reports revealed severe hypothermia, which experts believe was caused by prolonged exposure to cold temperatures. Michael Valva's actions were deemed reprehensible, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
I just can't, and I did not want my son to die.
Come here today and see an end to it.
We wanted to make sure that this man got the absolute biggest sentence he could under the law.
During Michael Valva's trial, the prosecution showed extensive surveillance footage from inside the home, and the prosecutors asserted Thomas and his brother had been abused for years. The Suffolk County District Attorney who tried the case referred to it as heartbreaking and one of the toughest cases he has experienced in his 30 years as a prosecutor. Several staff members from Thomas's elementary school testified to the conditions they witnessed Thomas come to school in. Amber Guyger, a white former police officer, entered an apartment she believed was hers, but instead she found 26-year-old Botham John, a black man, inside. What happened next would ignite a firestorm of controversy and spark a nationwide debate about race and policing in the United States.
I'm an off-duty officer. I thought it was in my apartment, and I shot a guy thinking it was my apartment.
Amber Guyger, a police officer with the Dallas Police Department, lived in a 4-story apartment complex located 2 blocks northwest of her police headquarters in the Cedars district of South Dallas. The floor plans at the complex were identical on every floor, making navigation within the building challenging. On September 6, 2018, Amber Guyger left work after her 13.5-hour shift as a patrol officer around 9:30 p.m. As she was driving home, she engaged in a conversation with her partner. She was armed with her handgun during this time, but her body camera was not turned on. Upon arriving at her apartment complex, Amber failed to notice that she had taken the wrong floor. As Amber attempted to enter what she thought was her apartment, she saw the door was ajar, thinking it was an intruder. Amber drew her weapon and entered the apartment. Once inside, Amber encountered Botham John in his living room, eating ice cream. In a tragic turn of events, Amber shot and killed Botham, striking him twice in the chest. Amber Guyger called 911 to report the shooting.
Get up, man.
Dallas 911, this is Carla. Where's your emergency?
Hi, this is an off-duty officer. I need EMS. I'm inside the apartment with him. Hey, come on.
What's your name?
I'm Amber Guyger. I need to get me, I'm in...
Okay, we have help on the way.
I know, but I'm gonna lose my job.
Botham John was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately, he succumbed to his injuries and died. 3 days later, Amber was arrested and charged with manslaughter. However, the charge was later upgraded to murder following further investigation. In the aftermath of the shooting, Amber was placed on administrative leave by the Dallas Police Department. However, on September 24, 2018, she was fired. The firing resulted from her violation of department policies regarding the use of force and entry without consent.
But there is much more to be done by the city of Dallas.
Amber Guyger's trial began on September 23, 2019. She took the stand in her own defense, recounting the events that led to her shooting of Botham John and testifying that she feared for her life and thought Botham John was an intruder in her apartment. Both the prosecution and defense presented expert witnesses who testified about the use of force, split-second decision-making, and self-defense. After deliberating for about an hour, the jury returned with a guilty verdict against Amber Guyger on October 1, 2019. The following day, she was sentenced to 10 years in prison for her role in Botham's murder. During the sentencing phase of the trial, Botham John's mother, Allison John, provided an emotional testimony, sharing the impact her son's death had on her life and her family. Botham's younger brother, Brant John, also took the stand, expressing his forgiveness for Amber and even hugging her in the courtroom. Although Botham's father did forgive Amber, he wanted her to be stiffer.
Somebody told her that Botham was shot and that he died. My life has not been the same. It's just been like a roller coaster. I cannot sleep. I cannot eat. It's just been the most terrible time for me.
But I love you just like anyone else. I'm not gonna say I hope you rot and die. And I wasn't gonna ever say this in front of my family or anyone, but I don't even want you to go to jail.
Amber Guyger's appeal has been denied, which means that her sentence will stand as decided by the courts. She is still eligible for release as early as September 2024. On the other hand, her full sentence will continue to run until September 2029. The Amber Guyger trial sparked conversations and debates about racial profiling, police brutality, and criminal justice in the United States. Critics argued that Amber's conviction was a rare example of accountability in a system that often favors officers in use of force cases. Supporters of Amber expressed concerns about the potential for vigilantism if officers were discouraged from exercising their right to defend themselves. Whereas some argue Amber Guyger killed Botham John accidentally, there is no doubting that Michael Dotro's actions were driven by pure hatred.
The sentence to be imposed in this particular case is because Mr. Dotro, through his conduct and his admissions, spanning from 1998 to this year, represents the worst that we could possibly expect from someone in our society.
Michael Dotro, a police officer, harbored deep resentment towards his superior deputy chief, Mark Anderko. He was frustrated by the chief's decision to rearrange his shift times and order him to undergo an evaluation with a clinical psychologist, following the 11th excessive force complaint against him. In retaliation, Michael Dotro decided to take matters into his own hands. Late at night, as Mark Anderko and his family slept peacefully in their home, Michael Dotro carried out a chilling act of violence. Michael intentionally firebombed Mark's home, causing extensive damage to the property. Miraculously, everyone managed to escape alive, narrowly avoiding what could have been a tragic loss of life. Michael Dotro was arrested and taken into custody, facing an array of criminal charges. He had been accused of cyberbullying a woman who worked in the police department, slashing her tires, using the department's computer to access information illegally, and possessing marijuana and paraphernalia in his police bag. Furthermore, it was discovered that Michael had prohibited weapons in his possession, including a blackjack and brass knuckles. The prosecutor at Michael Dotro's trial delivered a powerful opening statement, calling the defendant's actions a disgrace to the oath he took as a police officer. According to the prosecution, during the hearing, Michael showed no remorse and offered no apology to his former superior, Mark Anderko, whose entire family was victimized. During the sentencing hearing, the judge handed down a stringent punishment. Michael was sentenced to 20 years for attempted murder and 10 years in prison for aggravated arson. Additionally, he received 10 years for official misconduct, 5 years for conspiracy to tamper with a witness, and 18 months for conspiracy to retaliate. These sentences were to be served consecutively, meaning Michael would first serve 17 years before being eligible for parole. Additionally, Michael was ordered to serve 5 years probation upon his release. One day in his sentencing hearing, Michael's wife made a shocking statement to the courtroom. She referred to Michael as a manipulative monster before a sheriff officer instructed her to be quiet. When it comes to dirty cops, there is no doubt Michael Dotro is one of the worst of the worst. While he never killed anyone, the same can't be said about Jeffrey Morland.
Several people took the stand today, including Cara Jo Roberts' husband and the detective who described to the jury the red flags that he knew pointed to murder.
On November 5, 2008, Cara Jo Roberts, a happily married woman with 2 children, was discovered fatally shot in her home. The scene was gruesome, as Cara had been assaulted before her murder. Her killer had meticulously planned the killing, leaving Cara's body in the bathtub with the water running. An investigation into Cara's murder was swiftly launched, but the case soon became a cold one. The police, fearing there was a serial killer stalking the streets, grew concerned that the person who murdered Cara would strike again. Their fears were justified, as 2 years later, in October 2010, another heinous crime occurred. In October 2010, Paige Huser went to check on her 75-year-old mother, Nina Whitley, after not hearing from her for a while. When Paige entered her mother's home, she found Nina dead at the bottom of the stairs. Initially, Paige believed that her mother must have died from a heart attack and accidentally fallen down the stairs. However, upon the arrival of the police and upon turning Nina's body over, it was evident that her death was not of natural causes. Nina had sustained several stab wounds to her chest, and there were indications that she had been assaulted. Police officers began canvassing the neighborhood where Nina lived, seeking any clues or witness accounts that might help them identify the killer. One resident who had seen a white male in his 50s walking with a limp and driving a black Jeep near Nina's house on the day of her murder provided valuable information to the police. This witness was able to give a detailed description of the man, which assisted the police sketch artist in creating a likeness of the suspect. DNA evidence recovered from Nina's body was sent to the crime lab for analysis. Although detectives failed to find a suspect, the DNA did match the DNA found at the crime scene of Cara Jo Roberts in 2008. Initially, Nina's daughter, Paige, did not recognize the suspect in the composite sketch. However, one day, while passing by a billboard displaying the police sketch, Paige's recognition hit her. The person depicted in the sketch was none other than her former boyfriend, Jeffrey Morland. Paige and Jeffrey dated for 3 years after meeting in a criminal justice course in college, but their relationship ended in 1987. Since their breakup, Jeffrey pursued a career in law enforcement. He became a police officer and eventually retired in 2005. The detectives quickly realized the significance of Paige's revelation and began investigating Jeffrey Morland as a suspect in Nina's murder. One of the key discoveries they made was that Jeffrey owned a black Jeep, the same color as the vehicle driven by the suspect at the time of the crime. This evidence further solidified their suspicions and prompted them to seek a DNA sample from Jeffrey himself. Jeffrey seemed reluctant to provide a DNA sample, delaying the request from the detectives. However, as the investigation progressed, Jeffrey found himself facing allegations of sexual assault. This turn of events provided an opportunity for the detectives to obtain Jeffrey's DNA through other means. Once the DNA was analyzed, it was found to match the unknown male DNA found at both Nina Whitney's and Cara Jo Roberts' crime scenes. This development strengthened the case against Jeffrey Morland, as it provided a direct link between him and both the murders. Jeffrey Morland was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder and sexual assault. He faced trial and was ultimately found guilty on all counts. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although it is clear Jeffrey Morland is a police officer and a cold-blooded murderer, the next case isn't quite so clear-cut. is former California Highway Patrol officer Tamika Johnson, a victim of domestic violence or a callous murderer.
That CHP officer is behind bars, charged with murdering her husband.
Tamika Johnson, a California Highway Patrol officer, found herself in a tragic situation in February 2009 when she shot and killed her husband, Marcus Lemons, while on a freeway exit ramp. After the shooting, Tamika drove to her parents' home with Marcus's body in the front seat of her car. When questioned by detectives, Tamika provided them with a detailed account of what led to the incident. According to Tamika, she and her husband started their night out at TGI Fridays, but an argument soon erupted. Tamika stated that she took the car keys and started to drive home, attempting to ignore the escalating tensions between her and Marcus. However, Marcus became enraged when she ignored him, grabbing her neck. Tamika claimed she pulled over on the freeway, hoping to calm down and defuse the situation. However, the struggle continued as Marcus took the keys out of the ignition, and a fight over Tamika's purse ensued. Tamika believed that Marcus was going for the gun she carried in her bag, and in self-defense, she managed to get hold of the weapon and shoot Marcus. However, after a thorough investigation, the detectives came to the conclusion that Tamika's story was not one of self-defense. Instead, they suspected it was cold-blooded murder. 2 years after her husband's death, Tamika Johnson was arrested and charged with murder. She pleaded not guilty and was held on a $2 million bail as she awaited trial. Due to her arrest, Tamika was placed on administrative leave without pay from her position as a California Highway Patrol officer. During Tamika's trial, her defense attorneys attempted to present her as a victim of domestic violence, not as someone who committed a callous act of murder. However, the prosecution countered these claims by presenting evidence that Tamika had exhibited aggressive tendencies and a tendency to drink excessively. Additionally, the prosecution painted the victim, Marcus, as a kind and peaceful man. Tamika took the witness stand to testify in her defense, but her statements did little to sway the jury. The jury ultimately found her guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing her to 50 years to life in prison. After the verdict was read, Tamika slid out of her chair behind the defense table and onto the floor. She was handcuffed to a gurney rail by her left wrist and removed from the courtroom as her family wailed and sobbed. Tamika's actions shocked us all, but what's coming next sparked nationwide outrage. You won't want to miss it.
Sergeant Everard guilty on all counts and Corporal Weems guilty of involuntary manslaughter, reckless conduct, and oaths of office. Now, the two were accused of tasing 24-year-old Gregory Towns to death back in April of 2014.
This is Marcus Everard, a former police officer from East Point, Michigan, who ignited a nationwide debate in 2014. Alongside fellow officer Howard Weems, Everard tasered 24-year-old Gregory Towns to death. On April 11, 2014, the two officers responded to a domestic violence report from Towns' girlfriend, Aisha Smith. She had called the police, alleging that Towns had abused her, prompting Everard and Weems to visit the house. According to testimony, Towns attempted to flee upon seeing the police. After being caught and handcuffed, Everard instructed Towns to walk to the patrol car. Towns, claiming he was too exhausted to walk, refused. In response, Everard and Weems used their tasers on him repeatedly, until he became unresponsive. Their intention was to force Towns to comply, but their actions resulted in his death. The prosecution called the act a violation because, at the time Everard and Weems tasered Towns, he was already handcuffed and struggling to breathe. Initially, the defense argued that it wasn't the taser that caused Towns' death, but an underlying health condition, a rare sickle cell trait, that coincidentally led to his unfortunate demise. Everard was eventually charged with involuntary manslaughter and felony murder. This wasn't Everhard's first brush with controversy. Past records revealed a pattern of aggressive behavior. This case underscored the urgent need for reform in police practices and the importance of accountability in law enforcement. During the investigation, it was revealed that Everard had used the taser on Towns for more than 40 seconds, far exceeding departmental policy limits. The defense argued that Everard was unaware of Towns' health conditions and was simply following his training to subdue a resisting suspect. Despite these claims, the excessive use of the taser led to Marcus Everard being charged for Towns' death. This case marked a significant moment in Michigan's history. It was the first time a police officer had been convicted of a crime for using a taser on an individual. Everard was eventually sentenced in December 2016. During the verdict, where he was informed that he could be facing up to 15 years in prison, Everard appeared indifferent, showing no emotion or reaction. As the judge read the sentence, Everard seemed more interested in leaving the courthouse. His lawyer expressed disappointment in Everard's conduct, but offered little else in terms of defense or remorse. This lack of response from Everard further fueled public outrage and underscored the tragic impact of his actions on Gregory Towns and his family. Ultimately, Everard was sentenced to life in prison for his actions. While no recorded statements were made during the sentencing, it was reported that he released a statement expressing remorse. In his statement, Everard acknowledged the profound impact his actions had on Gregory Towns' girlfriend and child. He said, "I am truly sorry for the pain that I have caused the Marshall family. I am aware that nothing I can say or do can bring back their loved one, but I want them to know that I am taking full responsibility for my actions." This statement, while expressing remorse, did little to undo the damage and suffering caused by his excessive use of force. This case brought intense scrutiny to the use of force and aggression by police officers. For Towns' family, the conviction brought a measure of relief, knowing that Everard was held accountable for his actions. Aisha Smith, Gregory Towns' girlfriend, expressed a personal struggle with the situation. She stated that she would work to forgive herself for calling Everard and Weems to the house, despite the tragic outcome. What's worse than a single corrupt cop? An entire specialized unit of them. And that's exactly what the next case will expose.
Desmond Mills pled guilty to excessive force and conspiracy to witness tampering today. He's now facing 15 years in prison. He's expected also to plead guilty to several other charges.
Desmond Mills joined the Memphis Police Department in March 2017 and quickly became part of the Scorpion Unit, a specialized predictive policing team. Scorpion, which stands for Street Crimes Operation to Restore Peace in Our Neighborhoods, was designed to utilize advanced data analysis and statistical algorithms to protect and prevent crime in targeted areas. Unlike traditional officers, the Scorpion Unit members, including Desmond Mills, operated in plain clothes and wore bulletproof vests labeled police. Their unmarked vehicles and covert operational methods allowed them to blend into their surroundings, making their presence less conspicuous to the public. This undercover approach was intended to enhance their effectiveness in identifying and addressing criminal activity discreetly. On January 7, 2023, Desmond Mills and 4 other officers from the Scorpion Unit stopped Tyre Nichols, a 29-year-old African-American FedEx worker and amateur photographer. At 8:24 p.m., just 2 minutes from his home, Tyre found himself in the midst of a harrowing encounter that would tragically alter his life. The encounter began with the officers pulling Tyre from his car and throwing him to the ground. As they tased him and issued threats, another officer further escalated the situation by deploying pepper spray into Tyre's face, intensifying his pain and confusion. Despite their efforts to subdue him, Tyre managed to break free and fled, prompting the officers to give chase. The situation escalated when the officers caught up with Tyre Nichols. What followed was a brutal and unrelenting assault. Desmond Mills, armed with his baton, delivered merciless blows to Tyre, while another officer pummeled him in the face. A third officer joined in, kicking Tyre's torso with force, causing severe injuries. Throughout this ordeal, Tyre's desperate cries for his mother pierced the night, but no one came to his aid, leaving him to endure the relentless beating alone. Paramedics arrived at the scene and Tyre was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Despite medical efforts, he succumbed to his injuries 3 days later, leaving behind a devastated family and a community grappling with shock and sorrow. Tyre's family attorney has accused the police officers of torturing Tyre to death, an allegation that has prompted the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to launch a probe into the excessive use of force during his arrest. 2 weeks after the tragic death of Tyre Nichols, on January 24, 2023, the Department of Justice and the FBI announced that they would open a civil rights investigation into the case. This decision heightened the scrutiny of the officers involved and added a layer of federal oversight to the local investigation. In the days that followed, the 5 officers implicated in Tyre's death were placed on administrative leave and subsequently fired from the Memphis Police Department. Their terminations marked the end of their careers in law enforcement. The investigations culminated in the arrest of Officer Desmond Mills and his 4 colleagues, who faced serious charges including second-degree murder, aggravated assault, kidnapping, official misconduct, and oppression. Despite the gravity of these charges, all 5 officers were granted bail and released shortly after their arrests. The Scorpion Unit, the task force to which they belonged, was disbanded in the wake of the scandal. In November 2023, Desmond Mills pleaded guilty to the state charges as part of an agreement with federal prosecutors. Desmond agreed to testify against the other 4 officers at their trials as part of the plea agreement. The prosecution recommended a 15-year sentence for Desmond. However, Desmond's sentencing hearing, originally scheduled to be held in May 2024, was postponed until November. He will be free until then. Desmond Mills's case was shocking, but nothing will make you lose faith in the law enforcement agencies faster than the horrific actions of a group of cops called the Goon Squad.
In the last hour, 6 former Mississippi officers were sentenced to 15 to 45 years in prison on state charges in the assault and torture of 2 black men. The officers pleaded guilty to charges including hindering prosecution, burglary, home invasion, and aggravated assault.
These 6 men, known as the Goon Squad, left many stunned with their choice of name, given their roles as law enforcement officers. The crimes they committed are so egregious and disturbing they will make your blood boil.
5 former deputies and 1 police officer entered this home, no warrant, no evidence that anything was happening there. And they proceeded to torture these men for hours using food, at one point a sex toy, and threatening an execution.
On January 24, 2023, in Mississippi, the so-called Goon Squad, comprising officers Brett McAlpin, Hunter Elward, Christian Dedman, Jeffrey Middleton, Daniel Opdyke, and Joshua Hartfield, inflicted brutal and inhumane torture on Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker for over an hour and a half. The officers, under the guise of a law enforcement operation, had responded to a report alleging that Jenkins and Parker had entered the home of Christy Wally, a childhood friend of Parker who had been paralyzed. Parker, her caretaker, was unjustly targeted. The Goon Squad forcefully broke down the front door and restrained Jenkins and Parker without a search warrant, initiating a horrific sequence of events. Wally was in the hospital when this horrific incident happened. The Goon Squad referred to Jenkins and Parker with slurs and insults while beating and torturing the men. Opdyke found an adult toy in the house and forced it into Parker's mouth. Another of the officers, Christian Dedman, threatened to the men, and he attempted until he realized that Jenkins had defecated on himself. If you thought this was all, you're wrong. Elward held the 2 men down and watched as Dedman poured cooking oil, eggs, chocolate syrup, and milk, among other kitchen ingredients, on them. Officer Joshua Hartfield also subjected Jenkins and Parker to further torment by using a taser on them while they were restrained. After nearly 2 hours of relentless torture, the officers ordered Jenkins and Parker to take a shower to conceal the evidence of their cruelty. Unfortunately for the victims, the horror was far from over. Elward forced his gun into Jenkins' mouth and fired, despite a failed initial attempt. The bullet inflicted severe damage, tearing through Jenkins' mouth, shattering his jaw, and exiting through his neck. Before fleeing the scene, the Goon Squad planted a gun and drugs in the home, falsely accusing Jenkins of having fired at them first. The Goon Squad then took the security footage from the house and discarded it in a river to destroy evidence of their crimes. They ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges, including deprivation of rights under color of law and obstruction of justice, among others. Lead attorney Malik Shabazz described the case as one of the worst he had ever encountered. The sentencing process was lengthy and overdue. Despite their guilty pleas in August 2022, the Goon Squad did not face sentencing until March 2024. As their sentences were read, the Goon Squad displayed a range of reactions. Brett McAlpin, who was considered the de facto leader or mafia don of the group, was sentenced to over 27 years in prison. His voice reportedly trembled as he addressed the court. The victims had described McAlpin as a tyrant or a king due to his commanding presence and his role in directing the other deputies during the torture. The rest of the Goon Squad acknowledged that the group would not have existed without McAlpin's leadership and influence. McAlpin offered an apology for his actions, but it was met with little consolation from the victims, who held him responsible for orchestrating the horrific events at the Braxton home. Daniel Opdyke, sentenced to 17 years in prison, broke down in tears as he addressed the court. His emotional plea included an apology for sexually assaulting Jenkins, but it was insufficient to undo the damage. Jenkins, accompanied by his aunt, chose to leave the courtroom in response to Opdyke's speech. Opdyke pleaded for sympathy by revealing that he had been sexually assaulted by his father until he was 8 years old, attributing his actions to this trauma. He was also responsible for handing over evidence from the Goon Squad's WhatsApp group chat to the police. After his apology, he was led away in chains, weeping as he exited the courtroom. Hunter Elward, who had shot Jenkins in the mouth, was sentenced to 20 years. In a tearful address, he offered a heartfelt apology to the victims for his actions, expressing remorse for shooting Jenkins and leaving him to bleed to death. Jeffrey Middleton received a sentence of 17.5 years for his role in obstructing justice and abusing the victims. Joshua Hartfield, who was sentenced to 10 years, was the only officer not affiliated with the Rankin County Sheriff's Department. His participation in the torture was attributed to his desire to join the department, where he had applied for a position. Hartfield used a taser on the victims and attempted to destroy evidence. During his sentencing, he choked back tears and wept as he apologized for failing to help those who needed him most. The man who got the longest sentencing was Christian Dedman. He was described as oppressive, sick, and the most sexually perverted of all the perpetrators for his actions. He threatened to rape the victims and poured multiple kitchen ingredients on them. Dedman was sentenced to 40 years in prison. He never addressed the victims directly, but he said that he would never forgive himself for the crimes he committed.
For, what, is given and what is done, I forgive that part. But other than that, he still did, what he did, and he has to be punished for that.
If I had to see them again, I would probably just start praying. I'd probably be scared out of my body.
While the Goon Squad lived up to their name, the same can be said about Wayne Jenkins, where HBO couldn't resist turning his case into a 6-part series.
A judge sentenced Sergeant Wayne Jenkins to 25 years in federal prison.
You have a gun in? Probably, I would say 2.25 just by looking at it.
Inside the Baltimore Police Department, a sinister underworld was thriving. 8 police officers were found to be running an organized crime ring, their nefarious activities orchestrated by none other than Wayne Jenkins. Wayne Jenkins, the head of the Gun Trace Task Force, wasn't your typical cop. His name became synonymous with corruption. Planting evidence was just the beginning. He masterminded robberies and even stole drugs from looted pharmaceutical companies.
Newly released videos show the officers pretending to open a safe for the first time.
Hey, Sarge! Hey, come downstairs right quick. They're about to get it open.
But in fact, prosecutors say they'd already gotten in, took $100 grand for themselves, then pretended this was the first time they'd laid eyes on the cash.
The Gun Trace Task Force was established with a noble purpose, but under Wayne Jenkins, its mission was twisted beyond recognition. Instead of upholding the law, Jenkins and his crew became the very criminals they were supposed to apprehend. Robbing people at gunpoint, stealing and selling drugs, they raked in over $1 million. But the trail of devastation they'd left didn't stop at financial gain. It included a haunting human toll. Recovered body camera footage revealed a harrowing encounter. Jenkins and his team attempting to rob 2 men in a car. The victims, desperate to escape, sped off. Jenkins pursued relentlessly, crashing into their vehicle and causing the death of Albert Davis. This reckless act not only shattered the lives of those directly involved, but also inflicted immeasurable pain on the victims' families, exposing the profound betrayal and corruption at the heart of Baltimore's police force. 7 years after the tragic incident, Davis's daughter was asked if she could ever trust the police again. Her response was poignant and revealing.
7 years later, we find out that corrupt cops who swore to protect and serve were nothing more than criminals. He apologized for it, Mr. Jenkins, but it still hurts.
But this is only part of the story. The real question is, how did years of organized crime go unnoticed within the police force? And how were they finally exposed? Surprisingly, the unraveling of this corrupt empire began with one man. His actions set off a chain of events that would eventually bring Jenkins and his crew to justice, revealing the extent of their betrayal. The turning point came with the conviction of a man who stole the that claimed a teenager's life. When the evidence was reviewed, wiretaps revealed a startling discovery. The voices of Wayne Jenkins and his 7 co-conspirators were heard repeatedly during the intercepted conversations. As investigators delved deeper, it became clear that the Gun Trace Task Force was entangled in far more than just rogue actions. They were key players in a sophisticated drug operation. It was uncovered that one of the task force members, Mamadou Gondo, had been providing protection to the drug crew, allowing them to expand their illegal enterprise into a lucrative $1 million operation. This revelation was the linchpin that exposed the depths of the corruption and criminality that had infiltrated Baltimore's police force. In addition to the damning recordings, investigators uncovered irregularities in official records, suggesting tampering. With the overwhelming evidence piling up, the FBI had enough to arrest and indict the corrupt task force members. Wayne Jenkins was finally tried and sentenced to 25 years in prison on June 7, 2018. Witnesses described him crying during his sentencing, pleading with the judge for mercy. He had confided in his attorney that he couldn't face a life sentence because of his children. His lawyer noted Jenkins showed signs of remorse, reportedly telling the judge he was ashamed of his actions. This dramatic fall from grace marked the end of one of the most notorious corruption cases in Baltimore's history, bringing some measure of justice to the victims and their families. But it's hard not to show remorse when you're caught, so we're inclined not to believe Jenkins. But in the case of Zachary Wester, it is even harder to believe.
Official misconduct, fabricating evidence, false imprisonment, possession of controlled substances, and drug paraphernalia, and perjury. Wester joined the Jackson County Sheriff's Office in 2016, but it wasn't until 2018 that people started to question his actions.
Zachary Wester, whose father was a police officer, seemed destined for a successful career when he joined the Liberty County Sheriff's Office in 2015. However, within less than a year, he left Liberty County amid allegations of sexual misconduct. Despite these claims, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, located northwest of Tallahassee, hired him in 2016. At Jackson County, Wester quickly gained a reputation for his assertive and aggressive policing style. His high volume of drug arrests earned him recognition and respect within the department. Yet, as the summer of 2018 approached, investigators for the district attorney began to uncover troubling discrepancies in Wester's police reports and body camera footage. Zachary Wester's misconduct came to light when body camera footage revealed him holding a plastic baggie in his hand before searching a woman's vehicle, whom he later arrested for possession. This suspicious behavior prompted a thorough investigation into his actions. When investigators searched Wester's patrol vehicle, they uncovered ready-to-plant substances and paraphernalia in the trunk. Prosecutors argued that this evidence proved Wester had been carrying substances he used to plant on victims during traffic stops. The incriminating discovery led to Wester's suspension from duty in 2019. Later that year, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement completed its investigation, resulting in his arrest. Following his arrest, prosecutors were compelled to drop charges in over 100 cases involving Wester from his 2 years with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. One of the pivotal witnesses in Zachary Wester's trial was Teresa Odom, a victim of his misconduct. In 2018, Zachary stopped Teresa for a broken brake light and requested to search her truck. Despite her initial reluctance, Teresa consented to the search. To her shock, Zachary claimed to have found a bag of in her purse. Teresa adamantly denied having any drugs, but to avoid a protracted legal fight, she ultimately pleaded no contest and was sentenced to 4 years probation. Her conviction was later overturned once it was revealed that she was a victim of Zachary's deceitful practices. The defense tried to paint Zachary Wester as a dedicated family man and upstanding member of his community, emphasizing his regular church attendance and charitable contributions. His wife, Rebecca, begged for leniency, describing Zachary as a fundamentally good person who had simply made mistakes. Yet, the overwhelming evidence presented in court revealed that his actions were not just isolated errors, but part of a broader pattern of corruption. Zachary Wester was ultimately sentenced to 12 years in prison. The impact of his actions was profound, affecting numerous individuals and the community at large. In a measure of justice, the victims of Zachary's misconduct were awarded a $1 million settlement. This compensation seeks to address the harm and suffering caused by Wester's corruption, serving as a partial remedy for the extensive damage inflicted by his fraudulent conduct. As the victims of his deceit receive a $1 million settlement to mend the wounds left by his betrayal, we turn to an off-duty Pentagon officer who attempted heroism by killing 2 people.
Tonight, a former Pentagon police officer is facing more than 2 decades behind bars for a deadly double shooting in Montgomery County.
Meet David Dixon, a former Pentagon police officer who made headlines in April 2021. While off-duty and in the parking lot of his Maryland apartment complex, Dixon encountered a troubling scene. He reportedly saw 3 men attempting to break into a car. In response, Dixon drew his weapon and fired at the fleeing suspects. The incident resulted in the deaths of 32-year-old Dominique Williams and 38-year-old James Lionel Johnson as they tried to escape with the stolen vehicle. A third man, Michael Thomas, survived the shooting and became a key witness in the case. David Dixon claimed he had acted in self-defense, asserting that the burglars were driving towards him when he fired. However, video evidence contradicted this claim, showing that Dixon shot at the men after their car had already passed him. and there was no imminent threat to his life. Thomas highlighted that Dixon's decision to shoot was not a legitimate act of self-defense, but rather an attempt to prevent the theft of the vehicle. Dixon's attorney argued that he performed a heroic act by stopping the burglars from stealing the car. However, the surviving burglar, Michael Thomas, admitted to stealing the vehicle during a 911 call made after fleeing the scene. This incident was not an isolated example of Dixon's questionable use of force. In 2020, Dixon had previously pointed a rifle at a homeless woman who was wearing flip-flops in the lobby of his building. This pattern of behavior raised further concerns about his approach to using firearms and the implications for his actions as a police officer. Dixon was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his actions. Before being led away, he offered an apology in court, explaining that he had reacted instinctively based on his training, but expressed deep remorse for his actions. Despite his apology, the court's decision reflected the seriousness of his misconduct and the need for accountability in cases of excessive force. If what David Dixon did shocks you, wait until you hear about the brutal crimes that Wayne Couzens committed because he had a police belt and badge to aid him.
A wholly blameless victim of grotesquely executed crimes, Sarah Everard's final hours said the judge as bleak and agonizing as it's possible to imagine.
In the case of Wayne Couzens, the horrors that unfolded under the guise of his role as a police officer are truly chilling. Wayne Couzens, a Metropolitan Police officer, was arrested and faced grave allegations including kidnapping and murder. On March 3, 2021, in South London, England, 33-year-old Sarah Everard was abducted while walking home from a friend's house. Unbeknownst to her, she was being followed by a white car, leading to a series of events that would send shockwaves through the community and beyond. This car had been rented by Couzens from a dealership earlier that morning in Kent. Dashcam footage showed Couzens parking near Sarah and the two standing beside the car. In a harrowing turn of events, Couzens showed Sarah his police warrant card before handcuffing her, falsely claiming that he was arresting her for breaching COVID-19 guidelines. The next time the car was spotted, it was captured by CCTV around Kent. Later that night, it is believed that Couzens transferred Sarah to a different car in Shepherdswell and her there. After doing this, he strangled her with his police duty belt. The next sighting of Couzens showed him switching back to his rental car and driving to a gas station. There, he was seen purchasing gas, large builder's bags, and duct tape. It became apparent that Couzens had intended to dispose of Sarah's body. He burned her remains in a refrigerator and later dumped what was left of her in a pond located on a part of his family's property in Hodes Wood, Ashford. On March 8th, Couzens returned his handcuffs and police belt, claiming he was suffering from stress. The following day, he was arrested after being identified as the last person to have seen Sarah Everard. Sarah had called her boyfriend just before Couzens abducted her and murdered her. Her boyfriend promptly contacted the police, prompting a search that ultimately pinpointed Couzens as the primary suspect in her murder.
Do you know Sarah? I don't know. Okay.
For a time, Couzens vehemently denied any interaction with Sarah Everard, even when presented with a picture of her. Despite his insistence, the officers leading the investigation remained convinced of his guilt and continued to press him for answers. What Couzens eventually revealed under their relentless questioning was shocking and horrifying, further unraveling the depth of his crimes and the extent of his deception.
I am in financial and I've been lent on by, I don't know who they are. They're a group, a gang, whatever. And they told me, right, I need to go and pick up bills and get them to them.
Couzens offered a startling and convoluted explanation. He claimed that he had paid for sex in Folkestone and was subsequently threatened by a gang of Eastern Europeans. According to his story, the gang had demanded another girl as payment, citing a previous incident where Couzens had allegedly underpaid a sex worker. He asserted that this threat was the reason he had kidnapped Sarah Everard, to hand her over to the gang. However, Couzens provided no concrete details or answers about how the gang had contacted him, or how the situation had unfolded.
They threatened to take my family away from me. So, at that point, I'm doing what I can to protect my family.
On June 8, 2021, Wayne Couzens confessed to kidnapping and murdering Sarah Everard. In September, he was sentenced to life in prison with a whole life order, meaning he would never be released. Additionally, Couzens received an extra 19 months for a prior offense of indecent exposure. The judge who sentenced Couzens stated that Sarah Everard's murder could have been prevented if Couzens' previous sexual offenses had been taken more seriously. This damning observation highlighted systemic failures that allowed his pattern of violence to escalate unchecked. Couzens was said to be shaking as his sentence was read, but video evidence was never provided. As a result of this brutal murder, the Met announced that they would stop deploying lone police officers in plain clothing. Wayne Couzens' case was shocking, but nothing will make you lose faith in the law enforcement agencies faster than the horrific actions of Newman Raja that shook the law enforcement community.
Newman Khan Raja, defendant, verdict. We, the jury, find as follows. As to count one, we find a defendant guilty of manslaughter while armed with a firearm as charged in the information.
Newman Raja, a Pakistani-American who became a naturalized U.S. citizen in 2001, had long harbored ambitions of following in his grandfather's footsteps, who had served as a police chief in Pakistan. After working in a small Florida police department, Raja joined the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department in 2013. On October 18, 2015, Corey Jones, an employee of the Delray Beach Housing Authority, faced a troubling predicament. After a performance with his band, Corey's car broke down on Interstate 94. Desperate for help, he called his bandmate, who arrived with oil and tried to fix the issue. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to get the car running again. Corey called for a tow truck and saw his bandmate leave, believing he would be safe until help arrived. However, Corey's night was about to take a tragic turn. Newman Raja, working undercover in an unmarked white van with tinted windows, came upon Corey's broken-down vehicle. Raja was engaged in burglary surveillance at the time. He later claimed that Corey, who was reportedly armed, confronted him, forcing him to use his weapon. Newman fired 6 shots, hitting Corey with 3 of them. One bullet struck a major blood vessel near Corey's heart, causing fatal injuries. The other 2 bullets hit Corey in his left elbow and right shoulder, fracturing his arm. At the time of the shooting, Newman was not wearing a body camera, and his van lacked a dash cam, leaving critical details of the incident unrecorded. Internal affairs at the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department quickly launched an investigation into the shooting, leading to Newman Raja being placed on administrative leave and eventually terminated from his position. On June 1, 2016, a grand jury charged Newman with manslaughter and attempted first-degree murder with a firearm. The state attorney's office of Palm Beach County argued that Newman acted improperly by opening fire on Corey Jones without identifying himself as a police officer. They contended that Newman's actions were unjustified and directly resulted in Corey's death. Following his arrest, Newman was released on bond and placed under house arrest. His release came with conditions, including surrendering his passport and wearing an ankle monitor to track his movements. In March 2019, Newman Raja was found guilty of manslaughter and attempted first-degree murder after a week-long trial. The jury determined that Newman had recklessly caused Corey Jones's death and attempted to kill him with a firearm. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison in April 2019. Following the trial, Corey's family pursued a wrongful death lawsuit against the city of Palm Beach Gardens. They argued that the city's negligence allowed Newman to serve as a police officer despite his misconduct, contributing to Corey's death. In 2023, Corey's family and the city reached a $2 million settlement, providing some measure of justice for the loss they endured. Now we head to Australia, where a devoted cop who had associations with organized crime ring members.
There are people who believe that I'm the most corrupt, wicked, diabolical person in the world. I can never change their mind.
Roger Caleb Rogerson's story is a significant case of police corruption in Australia. During his tenure with the New South Wales Police Force, Rogerson was highly decorated, receiving 13 awards for his service, bravery, and performance. However, his reputation took a dramatic turn when his criminal activities were revealed, leading to his dismissal from the force in 1986. Rogerson's actions and the subsequent uncovering of his crimes made headlines for years, marking him as one of the most notorious figures in Australian law enforcement history. His case serves as a stark reminder of how corruption can undermine even the most respected institutions. The first indicator of something going on was Rogers' association with other corrupt cops and organized crime ring members, including a substance dealer and convicted substance dealer named Arthur Nettie Smith. Roger Rogerson's involvement in high-profile cases like the Toe Cutter Gang murder and the Whiskey A Go Go fire initially bolstered his reputation. However, his descent into criminal behavior began to surface in 1981 with the shooting of Warren LaFranchi, a substance dealer. Smith's later claims that Rogerson had given him permission to commit multiple murders further tarnished Rogerson's legacy, highlighting the severe breaches of trust and corruption within the police force. The situation around Warren LaFranchi's death became even murkier with claims that he had shot at a police officer during the incident. The case took a darker turn when a woman who had testified against Rogerson was later found murdered in a pond in Centennial Park.
Rogerson shooting dead 3 people in the line of duty, including drug dealer Warren LaFranchi in a Chippendale laneway in 1981.
I said, this bloke's going to shoot me. I knew he was going to pull the trigger, so I've fired twice, and he's fallen over and he's landed in the gutter.
Despite the mounting accusations and evidence against him, Rogerson remained on the police force and was never charged for the shooting of Warren LaFranchi. The situation escalated when, in 1984, Rogerson was allegedly involved in the shooting of fellow officer Michael Drury. Michael, who survived the attack, testified against Rogerson, claiming that he had refused a bribe to tamper with evidence in a case involving a convicted dealer working with Christopher Flannery, an associate of Rogerson. Alan Williams, the dealer in question, testified that Rogerson and Flannery had conspired to kill Drury, offering $50,000 each for the job. Despite these serious allegations and testimony, the charges were eventually dropped in 1989, leading to Rogerson's acquittal. Rogerson's legal troubles continued despite multiple allegations and evidence against him. After being convicted of substance dealing and conspiring with dealer Dennis Allen, the appeal against these charges was dropped and Rogerson walked free. In November 1989, despite the charges being dropped, Rogerson was dismissed from active service duty to the Drury case. He was subsequently arrested in 1990 and sentenced to 9 months in prison for fabricating evidence. Rogerson's legal issues persisted, and in 2005, he and his wife, Ann Malocco, were arrested for perjury after lying to the Police Integrity Commission. Rogerson was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison, but was released after serving 12 months due to good behavior.
Mr. Rogerson is being taken from the steps of his family home now. Mr. Rogerson, do you maintain your innocence?
Absolutely.
Do you maintain your innocence, sir?
We're back to the Gestapo days now.
The last trial Rogerson faced was related to the murder of Jamie Gow, a 20-year-old student in 2014. The incident reportedly occurred after a drug deal involving Rogerson and former cop Glenn McNamara went awry. In March 2015, Rogerson and McNamara were charged with the murder of Jamie and the supply of nearly 3 kilograms of methamphetamine. The trial, however, was aborted the following day due to revelations of Rogerson's alleged involvement in multiple murders during his time in active service. Rogerson's final trial, which began in February 2016, culminated with his sentencing to life in prison on September 2, 2016, for the murder of Jamie Gow. Despite attempts to appeal the sentence in 2020, Rogerson's appeal was denied, and he continued to serve his life sentence until 2024. On January 18, 2024, Rogerson suffered an aneurysm and was rushed to the hospital. He passed away on January 21st after being taken off life support. He was 83 years old. An investigation was launched into his death due to standard protocols for deaths occurring in police custody. Rogerson's notorious career and criminal activities were so well known that his story was dramatized in a miniseries broadcast in 1995. If you thought these dirty cops were bad, wait until you see what we've got next. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.